My name is Dana. I'm 37, and I live just outside Austin, Texas, with my two kids, Maya and Colin. Life these days is busy. Mornings start early, evenings end late, and most of the time I'm moving between tasks like I'm on autopilot. But it's a life I built myself, and that makes it something I'm proud of. I work full-time at a marketing agency, and though it's not glamorous, it's a job I'm good at. I manage campaigns, meet with clients, write copy, edit, plan, organize, and troubleshoot everything from last-minute ad edits to team drama. People say I'm the glue that keeps things moving, and I guess I am. But I didn't always do this on my own. My life started out like a lot of others. 2 young people, a beat-up car, an apartment that smelled like old paint, and 1,000 dreams between them. I met Matt when I was 20. We were both working at a hardware store back then. I was doing cashier shifts between community college classes, and he was in the lumber department, always covered in sawdust and grinning like life was one big joke. He wasn't perfect. He didn't have much money, didn't come from a family with connections, but he had a work ethic that I admired. We started dating that year, and within 2 years, we were married. We didn't have a fancy wedding. It was backyard barbecue style. My cousin grilled burgers and a friend made the cake. I wore a dress from an outlet store that I still think was one of the prettiest things I've ever owned. Our first apartment together had a tiny balcony barely big enough for 2 folding chairs, but we'd sit out there at night and dream about the future. Matt talked about owning a business one day. He didn't care what kind, just wanted to be his own boss. I talked about maybe opening a little shop or going into design. At the time, it didn't really matter what the dreams were. What mattered was that we were dreaming together. The early years were hard. We both worked long hours, and money was tight. Some months we had to choose between groceries and rent. I remember one winter where the heater broke, and we just bundled up and laughed about it like it was some camping adventure. That's the thing about being young and broke. You don't realize you're struggling when you're doing it with someone you love. We didn't have kids until we were both more stable. Maya came when I was 27. She was tiny, with a head full of dark hair and the loudest lungs I'd ever heard. Matt cried when he held her for the first time, and I remember thinking, this is the man I'll grow old with. Colin was born 3 years later, and with him, it felt like our little team was complete. Somewhere in those years, things started to shift. Matt got into construction management, then branched off and started his own small firm. I helped with paperwork, did his bookkeeping at night, even wrote his first website copy myself. We were finally doing okay. Decent house, decent cars, birthday parties for the kids that didn't involve folding chairs and solo cups. And I was proud, not just of him, but of us, of what we had built from scratch. We were the couple everyone described as solid, dependable, the kind who stuck together. Even when we fought, we always circled back. We weren't flashy or overly romantic. We didn't do anniversary trips to Mexico or matching outfits. But there was a quiet steadiness to us. Or at least, that's what I thought. Now, looking back, I realize that steadiness may have started to feel like routine for him, like predictability. Like a life that had become too ordinary for someone who now drove a luxury truck and had his own business cards and a name people recognized. But I wasn't thinking about any of that back then. I was just doing life, packing lunches, editing campaigns at work, answering client calls while folding laundry, helping with math homework, attending birthday parties at trampoline parks, and occasionally sneaking in a few minutes with Matt at night when we were both too tired to talk but still happy to just be next to each other. I didn't know I was heading toward a turning point. I didn't know everything I thought we were would be tested. Because when betrayal comes, it doesn't knock. It doesn't warm you up. It just arrives. Fast, cold, and unforgiving. But that part of the story hadn't happened yet. Not back then. Back then, I still believed we were a team, and that belief would be the very thing that made what came next so devastating. The change didn't come in one big moment. It crept in, slowly, until I couldn't pretend not to notice it anymore. It started with little things. Matt used to come home and tell me about his day, who he met with, what went wrong on a job site, the funny thing one of the crew guys said. We had our rhythm. He'd pour a beer, I'd be chopping vegetables for dinner, and we'd swap stories about our days. Nothing dramatic, just the comfort of knowing someone wanted to hear what you had to say. But slowly, those conversations stopped. He started coming home later. Sometimes he blamed traffic, sometimes a meeting ran long. He'd still kiss me on the cheek, say he was tired, and disappear to the den or scroll on his phone through dinner. I'd ask how his day went and get a clipped, busy. No details, no stories, just that one word. Then came the phone. It was always in his hand or face down beside his plate. He'd excuse himself during dinner to take work calls and be gone for 20 minutes. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and see the blue glow of the screen lighting up the bedroom as he texted with clients. I didn't want to be the suspicious wife. I really didn't. I convinced myself it was just the stress of success. Maybe he felt like he had to prove himself now that his company was growing. But then he started looking different. He changed his hair, got new clothes he'd never asked me to shop for, bought cologne I'd never smelled on him before, started using terms like personal brand and upscale presence. At first I teased him about it, called him Mr. CEO. He laughed it off. I think he thought I was being cute, and maybe I was for a little while. But inside, a voice started whispering, and then the girls started calling. Not often. Just now and then, one of the wives from school would say something offhand. Hey, I saw Matt at Barstella the other night with some clients. He looks sharp. Does Matt work with a blonde woman? They seemed close. I would smile, nod, say thanks, but I'd feel that tightening in my chest. I tried asking him directly once. I remember we were sitting on the back patio. The kids were asleep. It was quiet. I looked over and said, "Is there something you want to tell me?" He blinked like I'd smacked him. "What do you mean?" I mean, I know something's changed. I just don't know what it is." He rubbed the back of his neck, avoided my eyes, and gave me this tired smile like he was the one who needed comforting. "Dana, I'm just tired. Work's been insane. You know how it is." I nodded, even though everything in me was screaming. But I didn't push, because I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe we were just in a rough patch, like couples go through all the time. I kept showing up, for him, for the kids, for our life. And then it happened. A Tuesday. Random. Forgettable. I was cleaning out the laundry basket in our bedroom and found a crumpled receipt in his pants pocket. Not unusual. Matt always left receipts, gum wrappers, change in his clothes. But this one? It was for a boutique hotel downtown. A weekend night, 2 guests, a room with a view. I just stared at it, felt the blood drain from my face, and for the first time I knew with absolute clarity, it wasn't just work, it wasn't stress, it was her. And then it all clicked. The late nights, the new clothes, the phone calls, there was someone else. I didn't cry, not yet. I folded the receipt, put it back in his pocket, and went to pick up the kids from school, because I still had a life to run. But something inside me broke that day. Not because I didn't see it coming, but because I had believed in him so completely. Believed that everything we had built meant something to him, and now I was standing in the ruins of it, and he hadn't even told me yet. But he would, soon, and when he did, I'd be ready. It didn't take long after I found the hotel receipt. 4 days to be exact. That Friday evening, Matt came home early. I remember it clearly because it was unusual. He hadn't been home early in weeks. The kids were watching a movie in the living room and I was just finishing up dinner. The moment he walked in, I knew something was coming. He had that look, not guilty, not sorry, just prepared. Like he'd rehearsed something. He didn't sit, didn't take off his shoes, just stood there by the kitchen island while I stirred a pot of pasta, trying to pretend I hadn't already put the pieces together. "Can we talk?" he said. I didn't say anything. I just turned off the stove, took off my apron, and nodded. He looked around, noticed the kids were in the other room, then leaned in a little, like he needed to keep his voice low. "I don't want to make this harder than it has to be," he said. That was the opening line. Harder than it has to be. as if I was some obstacle he needed to move out of his way. I waited, still didn't speak. He rubbed his hands together like he was cold. I've been thinking about things a lot lately, about us, about where I am in my life, and I don't think I'm happy anymore. There it was, word for word what I'd suspected, the classic script. I'm not leaving the kids, he said quickly, as if that would soften the blow. This has nothing to do with them, it's just, Dana, we've grown apart. You know it. I finally looked at him. No, I said, I don't know it. I've been here the whole time, growing with you, building everything with you. If you feel distant, it's because you walked away. He hesitated. He hadn't expected me to respond calmly. I met someone, he admitted. It wasn't planned, it just happened. I let that sit in the air. I wasn't surprised. I'd already known. But hearing it out loud was like someone flipping a final switch. Everything we'd built, every sleepless night with sick babies, every shared grocery bill, every cramped apartment and overdue bill and laugh and fight and promise, he'd erased it all for someone new. Is it serious? I asked, though I already knew the answer. He nodded. I think it might be. I wanted to scream, throw something, make him feel what I felt, but I didn't. Instead, I walked to the sink, poured myself a glass of water, and took a slow sip. Okay, I said. He blinked. Okay? I'll call a lawyer next week. We'll figure out custody. The kids stay here. His jaw tightened like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. Deep down, he knew I was the one who kept this family running. He left 2 days later, packed a suitcase, and moved into a condo in the city. Just like that, it was over. No drawn-out drama, no real apologies, just years of a life together, gone like dust. At first, it felt like I was standing in the middle of a collapsed building. I kept waiting for grief to swallow me whole, but it didn't. Not in the way people imagine. Instead, there was this strange calm, like the truth had finally landed, and with it, a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. I stopped asking why and started focusing on what's next. I reorganized the entire house, not out of spite, just because I needed to make it mine again. I replaced our bed, changed the curtains, got rid of the espresso machine he never let me use, because you'll break it. And most of all, I focused on my kids. Maya was quiet those first few weeks, always watching me out of the corner of her eye like she was waiting for me to break. Colin asked me every night if Daddy was coming home soon. I didn't lie, I just said, no, honey, but we're still a family, and I'm not going anywhere. And I meant it. It wasn't easy. I had to shift my hours at work, find after-school programs, cook every meal, handle every errand, and try not to cry during parent-teacher conferences when I sat alone in the little chair meant for two. But I did it. Every day I got up and kept going, because I had to, because no one was going to do it for me. Matt, meanwhile, had slipped into his new life with barely a ripple. I'd see glimpses of it on social media, photos of him at rooftop parties, dinners with friends that looked like auditions for reality TV. Her name was Kara. I'd finally heard it from one of the other school moms who had seen them at a wine bar downtown. She looks like she's in college, the mom whispered. No offense, Dana, but she's not even in the same league as you. I didn't need the comparison. I wasn't interested in being pitied, because I wasn't trying to be her. I was trying to be me again, the version of myself I'd set aside somewhere between carpool lines and business invoices and Matt's late-night texts. And slowly, that version of me started to come back, stronger, wiser, not bitter, just done. And what I didn't know then, what was still quietly brewing behind the scenes, was that while I was piecing my life together, Matt's shiny new world was about to crack wide open. It started as a trickle, small, almost forgettable things, a whisper here, a glance there. People who once gushed about Matt and his glow-up suddenly sounded less impressed. I wasn't trying to keep tabs on him, I really wasn't. But when you live in a town like ours, where people talk and everyone knows everyone through someone, it's impossible not to hear things. The first red flag came from Maya. She came home from her weekend visit with Matt unusually quiet. Normally, she'd have at least a funny story or a little complaint about how Dad still doesn't know how to cook properly. But this time, nothing. I asked her casually how things went, and she hesitated before answering. "He didn't take us anywhere this time," she said. "We just stayed in his apartment all weekend. Kara was there, but she didn't talk to us much. Mostly just stayed on her phone." I nodded slowly, not pushing. I didn't want to pull my kids into adult messes, but something about it made my stomach twist. Then Colin told me, almost offhand, "Daddy says he's not sure how long he'll stay in that apartment. He said the rent's going up and Kara's mad all the time." I didn't react, but deep down, I knew what was happening. Matt had been trying to live a life that didn't belong to him. He was used to building with someone, me. We had started from nothing, scraped together our lives with late nights and tight budgets. Now he was playing house with a girl who had never seen him in work boots or watched him calculate grocery totals on a receipt. He had traded history for novelty, substance for shine, and shine doesn't last. A few weeks later, a friend who worked in property management casually mentioned she'd seen Matt's name on a list of tenants behind on rent. I didn't say a word, just raised my eyebrows and changed the subject. But the pieces were coming together. Apparently, the business wasn't doing so hot. One of the larger contracts he'd bragged about for months had backed out. His partner, one of the original three who helped him start the company, had walked away citing philosophical differences, which in business speak usually means someone's screwing up or screwing around, or both. Then came the Instagram shift. Kara had been posting less frequently. The photos of wine tastings and new shoes turned into memes about loyalty and protecting your peace. Passive-aggressive captions, cryptic quotes. One day, a friend sent me a screenshot of a now-deleted post from Kara's account. "Some people will drain you until you're empty, then blame you for not being full." I didn't laugh, but I definitely smiled. It was only a matter of time. And then the call came. Not from Matt, he still had too much pride for that, but from his mother. A woman who had barely spoken to me in the past year, choosing to believe that Matt's sudden departure was part of some mutual decision we'd made like two civilized adults. She sounded uncomfortable, like the words she was about to say were stuck in her throat. "Dana, I know this is awkward, but Matt's going through a difficult time." I stayed silent. "Well, Kara's gone. Moved out last week, apparently cleaned out the savings account, took the car they co-signed for, and left." Still, I said nothing. I didn't need to. She filled the silence for me. "He's trying to get things back in order. He may have made mistakes, but he's still the kid's father." There it was. I knew where this was going. She wanted me to be... what? Sympathetic? Helpful? A safety net? But I wasn't that woman anymore. The woman who fixed things. The woman who covered bills, soothed egos, kept everything together while someone else took her for granted. That version of Dana had been left behind the same day Matt walked out our door with a suitcase and a clean conscience. "I'm sorry he's struggling," I said finally, "but that's not my problem anymore." There was a pause on the line. I could hear her swallow. "I just thought you should know," she said softly. "I do. Thanks for the call." And that was that. I hung up, made myself a cup of tea, and sat at the kitchen table while the kids worked on their homework in the next room. Life wasn't perfect. It was still chaotic, exhausting, and full of unexpected challenges. But it was mine. And the best part? I didn't have to shrink myself to fit inside someone else's version of success anymore. I had my peace, and no one, not Matt, not Kara, not anyone, could take that from me again. Some stories don't end with a grand confrontation or dramatic closure. Sometimes they just end quietly, with someone walking away and never looking back. That was me. There was no need to confront Matt, no teary, "look what you lost" speech. He already knew. His silence said more than any apology ever could. I didn't need him to spell it out for me. I could see it in his eyes the last time we crossed paths at one of Colin's soccer games. He looked smaller somehow, not physically, but like the air had gone out of him. The sharp confidence he used to carry, that puffed-up presence of a man who thought he had the world in his hands. It was gone. He smiled when he saw me, a short, forced twitch of the mouth. I nodded politely and sat on the opposite side of the field. Colin ran up to me at halftime, sweaty and smiling. I handed him a water bottle and brushed his hair back. He didn't ask me to go say hi to his dad, and Matt didn't try to come over either. We both knew exactly where we stood. I didn't hate him, I really didn't. Hate takes energy, and I had none to spare for a man who chose instant gratification over a life we built from scratch. A few months later, I was invited to speak at a local women's business group. One of the organizers had seen my recent campaign work and asked if I'd be willing to share my experience, how I'd climbed into leadership while juggling single motherhood. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't used to talking about myself like that. I wasn't a polished speaker with a Pinterest-worthy success story. I was just a woman who'd been blindsided, gutted, and left behind, and kept going anyway. But something inside me said yes. I walked into that room wearing a dress I bought with my own money from a store I never used to set foot in. I stood in front of 50 women and told them the truth. Not just about marketing or strategy, but about falling apart and putting yourself back together when no one's watching. About crying in your car during lunch breaks, then fixing your mascara and going back inside like everything's fine. About showing up for your kids when you're running on empty. When I finished, there was silence. And then applause. Not the polite kind, real applause from women who saw themselves in my story. That night, I got home to find Maya waiting up for me. She's 13 now, sharp as a tack and observant in that quiet, calculating way teenage girls have. "How was your speech?" she asked. I told her it went well, that I was nervous, but glad I did it. She looked at me for a second, then said, "You're kind of a badass, Mom." I laughed so hard I had to wipe my eyes. Because coming from her, that was everything. That's when I knew. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was growing, thriving, becoming the version of myself that had been buried under years of compromise, self-doubt, and quiet resentment. There are days when I still think about how things used to be. I drive past places Matt and I used to go. I see our old house sometimes when I take a wrong turn. But those memories don't sting anymore. They just exist. Like old photos in a box, faded but not forgotten. I don't need revenge or karma or some storybook ending where he realizes what he lost and begs to come back. Life already did the work for me. He traded loyalty for novelty, and in the end, he got neither. I still get emails from people who knew us back then, people who are shocked about how it all turned out. They say things like, "You were always the strong one," or "He really messed up." I don't respond, because it's not about him anymore. It's about the life I've created. Not the one I had to let go of, but the one I chose to build when I had every reason to give up. A life where my kids are happy, where my work is fulfilling, where I go to bed knowing I stayed true to myself. That's the ending I earned, not with drama or payback, but with peace, with freedom, with becoming the woman I was always meant to be. And that, to me, is the most satisfying ending of all.